Alright, welcome to this recap video of my Team League match with TheFinnisher. It was played last week, and the Team League matches are in a much lower time control than usual. It's 5+5 instead of 3+2 or whatever even quicker time controls you usually see me playing. So therefore I decided to make some analysis on it because especially the first game is very interesting, and the second game is also interesting to look at. Previously, I also made a video on my games with variants only. You can check that as well on my channel. And I decided not to stream them, but I wanted to give you some of my thoughts on this game. So here we go. First game, TheFinnisher has white, and he plays e4 as he usually does. And I respond in normal way with knight of 6, knight c6, and bishop b5 is played. And here you have a couple of options. You can put your bishop on d7, or as I did, you can play knight e4. And knight e4 is and normally white continues here with something like knight e2 or knight f3, castles, and then develop this knight to c3, the bishop to e3, something like that. And black tries to play e6 and bishop d7. Oh, sorry about that. Bishop d7, or he plays bishop out first and then e6. But TheFinnisher kind of surprised me here with f3, and it's a normal looking move, of course, because you attack the knight. But I always thought this opening of the king side so early might be problematic for white, but I didn't check it or anything, so I was on my own here basically. I figured e6 and queen h4 must be good to try to check the king and then try to put pressure early. There's also maybe the interesting option of going knight d6 here, and something like this, and sacrifice the piece for the pawn. And normally we see this on f6 happening, but this is sort of the same idea. You got some control over e5. But yeah, I didn't like the side of this, and then maybe a knight coming to f4 could be strong to put pressure on d5. But anyway, this is also an option to deal with this. But I decided to play e6. He of course took the knight. If you play something else, let's say knight c3, a random move, then queen h4 is already devastating because you cannot really block with g3. Because, well, this is just winning for black, or close to winning already. So he took the knight, and I played queen h4 as expected. And here you can put a knight on these squares to cover e4. And you have to figure out which square you like most. And he played knight at f2. You could also drop it on g3. Might be a bit more vulnerable here to let's say takes and something like this. And then the knight is pinned, and g3 is no longer an option. So knight at f2, sensible choice, and I decided to take the pawn. He played knight h3, and here I played pawn at g3. And after the game, TheFinnisher told me that he hadn't seen this idea before, so you could say he was out of book here. And why I played it is because I had to develop my bishop, or I had to retreat the queen, because bishop g5 is threatened. Let's say I play a random move. Let's play rook b8 just for showing this bishop g5, and the queen has no squares. These squares are covered by the white queen. So then I had to sacrifice my queen, and I don't think I have enough there. So therefore pawn at g3. If you play bishop g5 now, there's the simple solution, taking on f2, and at least I get already 2 pieces for the queen, and maybe the queen can survive. Yeah, so this is just looking really good for black. So he took the pawn, and I took the pawn back with my queen. And now the queen has some more squares. It can go back to g6 if necessary. It's attacking g2. And the finisher went for an interesting option, and I think also probably the best, and it's just developing and giving up another pawn. Playing rook g1. I played queen f3. And here the finisher decided to trade queens, and this is a really pretty side for white, you could say. Okay, he's a pawn down, as you can see here, but he has a lot of piece development, and he can try to go for pawn at f6 maybe, and then a pawn at g7 ideas later, and just try to bust open the position. He could have also tried something else here and just develop even more with knight c3. And I think that's also the best move by the computer, because it's also getting you ready to maybe get your king out of the center next, or bring the rook into the center. Both seem to favor white even further. But alright, he traded queens, and we reached this position. And here the finisher played knight d2, but knight d2 is a blunder, or an inaccuracy. And just like last time, I would like to challenge you to pause the video and try to find the best move here for black, and it's also almost taking over the advantage as well. So you can try to pause it now. And alright, the right idea here was pawn at h2, as I played, because the e3 square is going to be available after that, and you cannot really move your rook. Let's say rook here, then pawn at g2 becomes available as well, and this is just not a pretty sight. So yeah, he took on h2, and then I played pawn at e3, following up on the idea. And yeah, now white is in kind of trouble. He could sacrifice the piece here on f2. Remember, black sacrificed the piece, so he could sacrifice it back and just try to castle, for example. Then I take on f2, and white takes back, and here black has a really nice idea of playing knight at c3, threatening the bishop and threatening to open up the position like this. If you take, there's bishop a3 and queen at a1, and problems arising around the king. So this looks good for black. But he took the pawn on f3, sacrificing the knight on f2, but maybe he was a bit surprised by this move, I don't know. But I played queen at b4 first, because it's picking up the bishop and attacking b2. And this pawn is, even if you remove the knight, this pawn is really dangerous on e3. He played pawn at c3, and here I took on b5. But it was even better to leave the bishop there and take on b2. It's a bit counterintuitive, because you think, okay, he can take my piece with check here, I have to take back. But if you look at this position, it's really hard to find a good move for white, because the rook is just hanging, and if you move the rook, there's takes, and this looks really tough for white to defend. Take on f2 can happen next, take on c2 can happen. There's just too much going on, and there's just no attack for white yet. But alright, taking on b5 was also strong, but he had a nice move, knight d3, which he played, covering and saving his knight. So I decided to attack that knight. He covered it again with this other knight, so I forked these two pieces, and now he's covering them both. And here I decided to sacrifice a piece for a pawn, because I would like to put a pawn on either of these squares. And the knight on c6 wasn't doing much, so... And here I'm trying to attack on f2. He takes, and again I don't take back first, I take on b2 first to threaten the rook. And if you play knight back now, this is just overwhelming. and I can replenish pawn at f2 next if I want to, or take on c3. And it's just really strong. So he played king e2 to connect the rooks. Here I could take on c2 first with check. That was probably better than what I did. But also, yeah, I didn't have that much time left. But queen takes c2 with check, and then king takes e3. And I didn't spot the check here, or how to continue. But I can take here, and then there's a blocker. And now it's a bit hard to find the move, so I decided to do it the other way around, to take on c3 first, because now I'm covering e3 and threatening queen d2, and now white has to find a move with time pressure. And if you take the pawn on c2, he has a no-brainer. He only can take on e3, or he's losing the game immediately. So that's a little nuance there. Knight at f3 played, and now I take on c2, and we have the same position as before, only the knight is on f3, so the king cannot run this way. And here I played pawn at e4 because I didn't see how to continue. And it's an okay move, but there were probably better moves in the position. For example, pawn at f6, I think the computer suggested that you just take the knight and take this knight next and just grab some material. Pawn at e4. Here white could have played rook ac1. And takes. And this is still very double-edged. White has a lot of material, but he cannot use it just yet. And he has to be really careful about getting checkmated. But yeah, the king can find safety maybe on h1. So I don't know who's better here. But right, he didn't play rook ac1. He played queen at d2, and the same thing happened. But now I have a queen in hand, which is really important compared to the rook. The queen is much better in these types of positions. He played pawn at e4 to prevent the knight coming to either of these squares. So I went queen at c3. He blocked, and now I just try to take control over the back rank, basically. I wanna promote sometimes, maybe get these rooks out of the way. So I'm continuing with my plan, pawn d2. I'm not going into the lines here very deeply because in the game I also didn't have time to calculate those. So I'm just trying to give you my thought process here. I went pawn d2 so I can put a knight on either of these squares next to check the king and to force something. And if he doesn't do something about this rook, I can just take it with check and promote to knight, like this. So he moved the rook, I went knight at d1, he took on f3, I took on f2, he took back, and now I took on d4 and I took on e5, and now I've just grabbed some material. He has time to make a defensive move here, but I felt the queen is really good here. It's doing a good job, and I'll attack more later. The knight can still come to d1. I can try to lure the rooks away from g4, or then this knight from h3, and then put a knight on either of these squares. So that's basically why I just took on e5 and don't do anything more forcing with checks there. He attacked my queen. I went for the knight at d1 idea, and I promoted to a knight, and he took the knight, and now g4 square was available, so I just immediately went for the check there, forcing the king somewhere. If the king stays on the second rank, let's say king g2, then the rook can come into the game, something like this, and then probably I can take the bishop. Not really sure if I should take the bishop, but there is, for example, taking the queen, bishop at f2, something like this, and now white has to block. Let's say he blocks with the knight, rook h4, king g5, and f6 is made. Sample line. So that could be a possibility there. So the king moved back to g1. I played pawn at f2 to force the king somewhere more awkward. If you go to f1, rook at e1 is played. So he went to g2, and now I took the rook, because I saw that if he took my queen, that I had a very quick checkmate. But he took my queen, and again there's a checkmate here in the position, and you can try to find it on your own if you want to. Then you should pause. I'll show it to you now. The move is promote the. Oh, sorry about that. The move is promote the pawn to queen. It has to be taken. If you don't take it, if you have to go to g2, g3, I mean, and here you need to find queen f2, and if the king moves to h3, there's rook at h4, checkmate, and if the king takes the knight, that's not even possible because the bishop is here. I forgot about the bishop, so king h3 is forced there, and rook at h4. But the more obvious move, of course, is taking the queen on f1, and then you use the 2 rooks in hand to checkmate the king. Wherever he goes, he went to e1, but the rook is coming to f1 to mate him. Okay, so I won the first game here. Was really happy about that. But with the first game in the bag, I started out a bit too quickly in the second game. I played my normal opening. I deviate sometimes and play something else, but I decided just to play my normal system. And here I played h3 a bit automatically. You can also see I'm not using that much time on the clock. I should have played knight e5 first to control his move knight c6, because he played knight c6 now, and already black is doing really well and feeling happy about this position, I think. And here I probably should have played knight h4 and tried to go after the bishop, but again I was playing way too quickly here, and after knight b4 I had to play knight d3, because otherwise I'm just losing the c2 pawn. As you can see, there's no way to cover this except playing knight d3, because you don't play e4 in this situation. That's just this is just all close to winning already for black. So I played knight d3, he played c6. I could have taken on b4, but then the bishops comes to b4, so I decided to develop my bishop here. Now he took on d3, I took back. I'm taking back with the c pawn here because I like my e pawn covering the f3 square. Because black sometimes plays pawn at e4 and pawn at f3 and tries to attack you that way. Therefore the pawn is usually useful on e2. So he played h6. I took the bishop, and here we are entering the middle game, you could say, and already I was not happy with my position. Black is just doing really well here. He's putting pressure on this pawn. He can play a knight here, put pressure on this pawn. He could force me to play e3, and then he could put pressure on this pawn, and I just have nothing to pressure. My pieces are looking at d5, but d5 is covered more than enough. So my pieces are basically looking at the stone wall here. Okay, so I tried to continue. I played knight at d5. He then went for h3, of course, because d4 is no longer not possible. And here it's a hard decision to make. How do you play? I could have played h4, and then probably he would have played knight h3. Something like this happens, and yeah, now he's threatening knight at g4, and that's really annoying. If I take this back, there's knight at g4 takes, and then knight takes f2, picking up the queen. Maybe I should have tried this, because I can go for f6, but even trying an attack at f6 is probably too slow here. He can just take the queen and put a pawn on h3, and looks really dangerous. So I decided not to go for h4 but for g4, forcing him to sack. But actually the sack is working out really well for him, because he doesn't have to take on g4 first. He can take on e5, and if I now take the bishop, he can either play bishop at h2 and try to attack for me there, or he can just take this pawn and try something like this. And okay, there are some holes in black's position. He can even just try this. He can even take this back first if he wants, but pawn at g3, and this is looking good for black. Black has pieces around my king, and okay, I have this pawn here, but shouldn't be that much of a problem. So I took back the bishop, trying to prove that this attack is nothing here on g4 and h3. He sacrificed his bishop and then put a pawn on h3. And if I move the bishop back, he has what he wants. He can put a bishop on f4 and try to pressure me there. So I want bishop h3 at least. Now I have king h1 maybe in some cases. But he still played bishop at f4, trying to put a piece here on h2 and then a pawn on g2. It's basically his plan. And there's not really a defensive option here. If you play something like this, he can just take and then put the bishop here to pick up the pawn, and slow play it afterward, after those moves. So I played d4 and tried to defend actively, but I missed a really strong move a couple of moves after this. This is all forcing. He played bishop at h2. I'm forced to play king h1, and here he played a killer move in the position, and that's queen h4. And that's just a brilliant move, because you only need a pawn to mate. So you can sack your queen on g4, and I only saw that idea now and not over here, which is understandable, I guess. But TheFinnisher played it brilliantly, and he figured this out. So he played it like this. Queen h4 was played, and here I tried. Okay, maybe he didn't spot queen takes g4 and he wants to go for queen takes f2. So I tried bishop at d3. So if he takes here, I might have some tricks with knight at e7 and something like this. But even this probably is still okay for black. But he just took the pawn on g4, and here I decided to resign, because I can try to cover g2 by putting something on h3. But here still, he can just take the bishop, and if I take the queen, they're still mate with bishop h2. Maybe I should have allowed it, because it's a really pretty sight, but I was a bit disgusted with how I played this game, especially after having won the first game. But okay, in the end, we played 1-1, and our teams also tied the match, so I was happy to contribute to my team score with 1-1 against TheFinnisher. I, of course, would take that any time against him, but after winning the first game, there's always hope for more, of course. But I just played a bit too quickly, and he played brilliantly. I must say, after g4, he played only the best moves. I think if you check it with the computer. I haven't checked it extensively. I'm just analyzing a bit from my own thoughts here. But this attack is just a brutal one, and he finished really nice here with queen takes g4. Okay, thanks for watching, guys. I'll try to do more analysis on this format. I'm playing Oberwesen next round in the Crazyhouse Teamleague, and probably also playing Jan Lee one more after that. and I'm not really sure. GSVC, I guess, also. So very strong opponents lined up for me, and probably also some really interesting games. And I hope you enjoyed the video. See you next time.